Welcome, my fellow educators, to our cultural competent teaching checklist, basically an educator honesty check. So, the question that I'm going to encourage you to ask yourself and to think about and do a little bit of self reflection on as we're going through this PowerPoint slide is: Am I dot dot dot? Am I culturally competent? Am I working towards cultural competency? How am I addressing racism in the classroom? Am I addressing racism in the classroom or racial incidences when they occur? Am I comfortable with having a conversation? Am I not? If I am not, what can I do about it? Should I do anything about it? Who do I need to refer myself to in order to maybe help me understand how I can be a service of my students instead of a hindrance, and of allowing and not, excuse me, and of not allowing situations or occurrences in my class based on race to get out of hand. Yes, I know it was a lot, but these are the things that sometimes either we push up under the rug because we don't want to face it, because we are uncomfortable with it, or we are being faced with it and we just do not know what to do. And so I'm going to encourage you to utilize this checklist in order to do self reflection with yourself and in regards to your classroom and your classroom climate, your students, the behaviors that you see and that you witness and that you've also been exposed to. Side note before we get started: yes, sometimes within the videos, excerpts or clips when I'm speaking with you, you're going to see a little bit of shaking. I chose deliberately not to keep recording because I wanted to speak with you all with authentic, coming from a very authentic place. And so, thus, very rarely are you going to see me stopping and then starting to record again. So, if you see a little bit of the video shaking, it's not an earthquake. It was just me touching the table because I was kind of getting into having this conversation, having this conversation with you. And so, thus, disregard it and let's just keep it moving because dismantling racism is a whole lot more important than me re-recording for perfection over such a serious topic. And so I am looking forward to going through this slide with you, and let's get ready to do a self check, an educator honesty check together. Classroom accountability. That is something that we as educators are always basically kind of talking to our students about in regards to expectations and of course owning behaviors that may be displayed in the classroom, whether they are positive or negative. Well, I created this tool for us as teachers to do the exact same things for ourselves when it comes to having implicit biases. A lot of times we are treating our students a specific way and we're not recognizing that. And so this is for you to do basically self-reflection in an intentional way as you are assessing yourself in regards to how you are treating, how you are thinking, how you are perceiving your students and their actions, as well as your classroom or the things that are occurring in your school in general. I will say that this tool or this video, rather, this PowerPoint, it can also be used to work, you can also utilize this to be inclusive to your students, meaning that at the beginning of the school year, you all know that our schools are pushing for us to start developing classroom expectation and rules with our students. And so this is something that you can use in order to introduce having the conversation on racism and what you are going to allow in your classroom and what you're not going to allow in your classroom, and also have a actual conversation with your students as you all are keeping each other in check and accountable for racial incidences that can and may occur, or that you all are going to try to prevent from occurring in your classroom. Because remember, the goal is supposed to be comforting, and safe for our students, and a place of I don't want to say academic relaxation. No, seriously. It is supposed to be a place where the only thing that our kids are stressed over is academics. Not because they're afraid of how they're going to be treated, or if someone in the classroom, whether it is a peer or an educator ourselves, is going to treat them or say something specifically, even if it is unintentional, about who they are in their person in regards to their ancestry and their culture and their ethnic background. And so please feel free to use this as a checking tool or guide with your students as you're developing your class rules, excuse me, and expectations. First, let's start with classroom climate. The one thing that we all know as educators is that usually from the first day of school, or at least the first day of school on any day, a student usually has an idea of how their day is going to go or how their year is going to go based off the atmosphere of the classroom and the tone of the classroom that has been set, as well as whether or not they feel safe and secure or not. And so I would say for you as an educator to self check whether you are proactive or reactive when it comes to racism. Because remember, this video is on racism. And so a part of the mental health as well as the physical health of your students does have to take into account racism as well, because remember, you do have students in your classroom that are experiencing racism from literally the day that they are born until the day that they die. And then maybe without you even knowing, you may have students in your classroom that are the perpetuators of racism. And so thus you've got to figure out, where does your classroom fit into that? And so, for whatever rules that you have established in regards to tolerance, or rather intolerance, is the makeup in your classroom a safe haven for children or not? And I know that's something we don't like to kind of include in regards to safety for our children, but you should know that, if you already don't know, that racism is very, very insidious, and that it not only can hurt individuals um, physically, but it also does hurt them psychologically and mentally, and even in regards to their self esteem and their development and growth. And so the question is that you may need to ask yourself, or even your students, if you're doing this as a classroom expectation project, is my room, when it comes to racism, is declined? Do I have something in place that makes it proactive or reactive? For example, your syllabus. Are you addressing racism at all? And I ask that because there are teachers, educators who are. For example, I do. The first day of school, because remember, the first thing that we have to go over our students, of course, is the county rules, and of course our set rules that usually tend to be in our syllabus. And so, are you addressing syllabus? Excuse me. Are you addressing racism in your syllabus? Because I do know for me that I do. I address language, what is allowed, what is not, in regards to racial slurs, derogatory terms, treatment, interactions, racial interactions. For example, in my classroom, students are not allowed to say racial slurs. That includes different things. For example, football. We all know that we have a team here in the United States of America. The team is located in the DMV area, meaning DC, Maryland, Virginia area. And so we know that Washington has a team whose name starts with the R. My students are not allowed to say that racial slur because, first of all, it is offensive to Native Americans, indigenous peoples, the first peoples here in on this land. Secondly, in any given time, I have indigenous students in my room. And so therefore it is my responsibility to protect them and their person as well as their identity, and for them to be able to know that they can come into my classroom and not have to worry about an onslaught of racial slurs, exactly the same, the same racial slur that will be said over and over again, especially during football season. And so that is something that as a classroom at the beginning of the school year, we actually tackle. I am a world history, just, for full disclosure. And so for me, I do get to tackle it again, depending on where we are in the curriculum. And so my students do sometimes get a double or a triple dose of why that word is a racial slur and its historical background and the connotations that go with it. I know that other educators may not have that if they're not in history or maybe even in English or a social issues class. But with that being said, you can address it on the first day of school, maybe even the second day of school, if your students want to further that conversation. But those are the things that I do. I don't allow peer-to-peer friendly racial banter, meaning you know how sometimes kids will go back and forth and they will use derogatory terms or racial slurs, for example, the N-word. Students are not allowed to say that to one another, no matter what configuration they are saying there's, excuse me, no matter what how do I say this, ladies and gents? No matter what connotation it is being said in, whether it is a term of endearment or they're just joking, regardless, they're not allowed to say it because it does open up the floodgates for something else to occur, which usually is on the negative side. When pure racially charged interactions occur, I again have something in place. I will be honest with you, knock on wood. I have not really had any peer on peer racially charged interactions in my classroom for the mere fact is because I would like to say that my syllabus and of course continual reinforcement and conversations on inappropriate, let me slow down, I'm talking really fast. What I'm trying to say is that I don't allow my students to banter with one another. I am pretty sure that because of my syllabus and the classroom expectations in regards to racism that have been addressed have most likely set the standard in my classroom so that my students recognize that there is a penalty in what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And so therefore I would encourage you to establish in your syllabus guidelines for racism, what is accepted, what is not accepted, and what the penalty is going to be for that. And of course, make sure that you get those parent signatures and student signatures as you do it. And if you would like for me to go and explain this further, please contact me and I will definitely kind of walk you through that on what I do with my class. Next, we have classroom setup. Um, Basically, who is the face and voice that is visually represented in your classroom? Meaning, like when it comes to posters and memes and quotes. Um, who are you using? Especially when you start getting into history classes and science and math, because we have to be honest with one another. Our curriculum is written in a um, with a European perspective. And so thus, when our students are looking at these things, whether it's the posters in the rooms, the primary sources, whatever that may be, a lot of times they're getting quotes from non-melanated people, which we will tend to say in our society here in the United States of America, white people, I use the term non-melanated. The reason why I use non-melanated is because it does not carry the racial burdens that the other labels that have been getting given to melanated, meaning people of color, has, as well as non-melanated people like the term white. And so a lot of times I will use non-melanated, so you may hear me say that throughout this quick PowerPoint. But a lot of times we are using non-melanated voices, and what that tends to do is or their visual representations, and what that does is it while it is inclusive to our non-melanated students and it boosts their self-esteem and it gives them value on their own history and what their own people have contributed, it does not do the same for our melanated students, coming from the African American culture, indigenous, aka Native American, Latino, Asian, those of Middle Eastern ancestry, Southeast Asian, or whatever, whomever you may have in your classroom, they are not included. And so, thus, if you're not including your Asians in the class and their history and their voices, for example, then then they never get a sense of the value that their people have contributed to this nation. For example, we know that the Chinese out in California, they played a significant role in the building of the railroads. But if you're not giving voice to that, then our students are made to feel excluded instead of included. And we all know as adults how significant that is in regards to inclusion and acceptance from your peers and from society. And so I would say to my fellow educators, is to be aware of who's up on your board. And I'm going to be honest with you, when you're getting these quotes and when you're getting these pictures and these memes and these posters and and the artwork that we're putting up in our rooms, I would ask you that, yes, MLK, awesome. He was a magnificent man in regards to fighting racism in this country. Maya Angelou, phenomenal in regards to raising up expectations of who we are as individuals, especially in regards to women. But at the same time, that they are not the only voices of African Americans, as well as if you are going to have visual representations of your indigenous and your Latino and Asian students. They have such a plethora of other individuals out there who have made such significant contributions to this nation. And even outside of this nation globally, don't be afraid to go global, because we're always encouraged as educators to bring the globe into our classroom. So give our children visual representations of themselves, um, of themselves. And so we've just got to hear, this is not thinking outside of the box. This really is us just expanding our mindsets to what inclusion looks like and us recognizing that it's right in front of us. And so now we're going to jump to the next slide. That rather, I should say, reinforce stereotypes instead of individuals that are breaking those stereotypes. Yes, it's good for example, indigenous Native Americans. A lot of times teachers will want to bring into the classroom indigenous speakers and want them to wear their traditional regalia, which, by the way, is a beautiful thing. But at the same time, we must recognize that indigenous people also have evolved like the rest of us, and that they also have present day issues, modern day loves and hates and likes and dislikes, just like the rest of us. They don't live on teepees on a reservation, but they're also in urban areas living in the city, just like the rest of society here in the United States of America. And we have a tendency as educators to bring indigenous speakers into the classroom for our students at an elementary school level, maybe middle school, but usually it's the earlier years of the earlier years of middle school, but not the latter um, years, or we don't bring them either to our high school students who really need to be able to hear indigenous speakers. And that's just one example that I would like to use in regards to who we're bringing into the classroom and why we're bringing in these individuals into the classroom. And so the goal is that when we're getting speakers from other ethnic backgrounds, is not to reinforce stereotypes, but really to break them. And so that is something to actually consider. In regards to primary, secondary resources, I think I may have mentioned this. If I didn't, forgive me. Primary sources. Age of exploration. I'm a history teacher. That's the example I'm going to use. If you're going to bring up Christopher Columbus, also bring up primary sources of the indigenous peoples and who they interacted with. Because a lot of times, what we do in the classroom is we will bring up one side of the story or of history or of one perspective, and we don't balance that out with the others that may have been involved. And so, when you're bringing books into the classroom, who are writing the books? What perspective, what narrative are they conveying to our students as well as to us? Those are the things that we've got to think about as educators, even in regards to articles. If you're going to read an article, for example, to your, excuse me, if you're going to have your students to read an article, for example, about Thanksgiving, and I know I'm being repetitious, so just bear with me, about Thanksgiving. Who wrote it? Is it coming from a non-melanated reporter, or is it coming from a melanated reporter or writer? For example, if you're going to talk about Thanksgiving, you should also have materials from the tribes that were actually, or individuals from the tribe that were actually impacted. For example, the Wampanoag tribe, because that is who at one point the pilgrims, the pilgrims do meet. And so as you're telling the story, you have to give a holistic picture. And yes, in the United States of America, we may want to say that Thanksgiving is this time of family, but for our indigenous, is it? And if it isn't, why not? And so that is how you tackle racism in your classroom, sometimes without even having to use the term racism, because you're already exploring that and diving into it. And you are already at the cusp, no, at the beginnings of dismantling it, or at least having your students and yourself to self-check on what you thought was correct or right. And if it wasn't, was it racist or not? Is it? So these are the things we as educators that we've got to really start doing self-reflections on, even especially in regards to media when you're using movie clips and documentaries. For example, I had a student when we were doing we were in a lesson, and I was using footage and documentaries, and one of the students said, "Miss Simmons, have you watched the movie Apocalypto?" And I was like, "Yeah," and I was like, "It's not a bad movie." I was like, "I have issues with it, but it's not a bad movie." And they were like, "Well, maybe that's a clip you should consider." And I told them, "It's a good movie if you want to look at it coming from a sense of entertainment." I said, "But Miss Simmons would never use that movie as a clip in order to validate history." And they wanted to know why. And I said, "First of all, because I was like, it's coming from a European perspective. It was developed from someone of European ancestry." And I was like, there is a lot of misconceptions and inaccuracy in this movie. And I said, not only that, I was like, it's supposed to be about the Mayans, but when the Mayans was trying to tell the director and the people behind the movie that there were a lot of inaccuracies, they refused to listen to their voice. And see, right then and there, you had a movie that is pushing a stereotype that is inaccurate. And so, thus, these were the conversations that I had to have with my students so they could understand how stereotypes can, what is it? How stereotypes can actually push a people's narrative the wrong way, and as well allow misconceptions and misrepresentation flourish, which can lead to racism. And so we as teachers also too have got to do some self checks on the materials that we're using and what we're exposing our students into. And are we are we reinforcing racism and all of the what is it, you all, and all of the negativity and the misconceptions that come with it? Or are we doing our roles as teachers and helping to dismantle it and give our students truths? And so that is something that I felt as though needs to be addressed on our list of self checks. Last but not least, instruction. Racism in the classroom. And a lot of times when we think of instruction, we think of how we are actually implementing or executing our lessons to our students. This is not what I'm speaking about when I talk about instruction. I'm talking about our actions as educators in the classroom. Are you self-checking your biases internally? Meaning through your actions on how you interact with your student, especially in regards to infractions, expectations, language being used. Um, for example, if Jimmy, Jamal, Jesus all are committing the same infractions within the classroom, whether it is on the same day or periodically or consistently throughout the classroom, what is your visceral reaction to that? And what tends to be the outcome if you decide or choose to act on the disruption or the infraction that they are displaying in the classroom? Do you approach Keisha's, Kayla's, or Kim's eye roll the same? These are the little things that tend to get exacerbated in the classroom and get taken to a whole nother level in regards to discipline, depending on who the child is and what we consider, quote unquote, their track record to be. And if we give consideration to how we are going to approach it or attempt to be able to minimize it to where it's our students can either stay in the classroom or whether or not they're removed from the classroom. And so these are self-reflections that we've got to do. We've got to do the work, ladies and gents. We all do. Myself, everybody here in the classroom, we've got to start doing the work on how we treat our students based off of their successes as well as failures, as well as infractions. And are we exacerbating those moments in time, or are we trying to figure out of how to take the power from it so that it can be something that is positive in the classroom for us and our children? Are we using teachable moments in order to have productive and positive outcomes in the classroom for our students or not? Because sometimes our students do things in which their moments that could literally turn out to be something positive for not only you and that student, but also the class in regards to trust, development, and growth. And sometimes we're so quick to jump on our students in order to in the action that we feel is negative. And as educators, we know this. Students know from the moment that they interact with you whether or not you like them, you fear them, you accept them for who they are, whether or not you think there is promise in them. Our students know this. They know this, and they really notice and they take note of internally how we treat them versus how we treat other individuals in the classroom. Trust me, if you are getting on Keisha and you don't get on Kim for talking, all of them take note of that, because what you've done is you've set an expectation for those individuals as well as groups in your classrooms on what they can get away with and what they cannot, and what that reaction is going to be. And so as educators, we're not supposed to be fueling and facilitating resentment. I know that some things unfortunately cannot, be contained, but we can minimize those things in the classroom, especially if they're driven off a race-based subconscious ideology, which we call, quote unquote, implicit bias. And so I need you to try and figure out, or not I need you, I would encourage you to figure out, do you have a protocol set in place when it comes to you yourself, how you interact with your students of different ethnic backgrounds in regards to infractions and the things that they do and say in the classroom, when it is the same or not? And do you have one set in place for if you witness racism within the classroom or in the hallways, or if you have like a duty post that you have to that you've been in, put in charge with, of course, from administration? Do you have something in place for that? And if not, are you going to? Because understand this, ladies and gents, my fellow educators, it is our responsibility. We knew going into this setting that we're not only supposed to educate our students, but we're also supposed to make sure that they have a safe and secure environment. Protecting our children from racism and not allowing them to be hurt by racism, or at least to try to minimize the impact on racism on them, is our responsibility. And that includes if we are the ones who are the culprits or the perpetrators of racism, whether it is conscious or subconscious in regards to how we interact with our students of color as well as non-melanated. Because if we're witnessing them doing it and we are not holding them accountable, understand we're perpetuating and facilitating racism in the academic setting. And so, what is your protocol? Do you have one? Do you need to get one? If you do, what is it going to look like? Are you going to do it with your students? Are you going to do it within yourself or by yourself? Excuse me. Second, teachable moments. Are we utilizing them in the classroom? I've touched upon this already. Are we utilizing the curriculum? All right. Are we having these conversations with our students, allowing them to lead the discussion? We guide it, let them lead it so that we can understand what we need to institute in our classroom together as a whole, or as me, the educator, in order to protect and to provide safe, secure, warm environment for the student. And I said that intentionally without adding. Breed is trying to remote on me, ladies and gents. Isn't that interesting? Hold up for a second, and no, I am not going to stop recording because I am on a roll and I am not a perfectionist. I am not a perfectionist because I like for my students to recognize that mistakes can be made even with us as educators. And so, no, I am not going to stop recording and record all of this together. Our students need to recognize that we are human too. Just like we tell our students that there are no stupid questions and they're always afraid to ask us things, as teachers, we have to be willing to show our vulnerability as well as that we're human and that we make mistakes and that perfection is not a necessary. It's not a necessary. And so thank you for your patience, um, and giving me the opportunity to walk through you with our checklists for us as educators in regards to our implicit biases and whether or not we are checking them at the door. And how we're going to work with our students in regards to these things, because it is our time to be bold, to dismantle racism. It starts at the school level and should be and needs to work its way out as we, of course, society are handling it out here on the outside. Learning is a lifelong endeavor that we all take the journey on. Dismantling racism must become included in that process. It is our responsibility as humans to help right the wrongs of the past within ourselves, which is inclusive to our society and our classrooms. The institutions also created from it and within society itself. That is what a society based on justice does. Ladies and gents, my fellow educators, in the palm of our hands, parents have basically put their children in it. And when they send their children to school with us, they're not only expecting their children to be educated and given the necessary guidance and tools that they need in order to flourish within society as they evolve into adults. They're also expecting their children to be safe in our environment, not only from their peers, but also from us. Sometimes as educators, we do more damage to our students than they get from their pens, depending on the circumstances and especially the dialogue that occurs within and out of the classroom and what they are privy to or given to in regards to their assignments and the work that they're exposed to by our hands or not given that is supposed to be by our hands. And so I'm going to say to you that as you go through this internal, intentional self reflection within yourself, that you consider what you have not done and what you can do, not only for our students, but for yourself. Because if you make yourself better, then you create a platform in order for our students to also be better and to do better. Remember, they look at us. We are the ones who they get their guides and their cues from. Excuse me, their guidance and their cues from. And so thus, we are supposed to model for them what that looks like, not just with the lesson, but also through our actions. And it does begin in one regard, besides the household, also in the academic setting, in the academic setting. Because remember, our books, the way they are written, our curriculum, the way it is written, it has become, unfortunately, work or information that has become exclusive, it has been, instead of it becoming inclusive, it has become exclusive. And I'm not saying that correctly. It's just not inclusive. All right, it's not inclusive. And so thus, we are the change. We are the ones that are going to be able to help our students navigate through, at least to a degree, through this dialogue about racism. And if we can't navigate them through it, at least we can try our best to keep them safe from it. And so, on that note, in the next video, I hope you listen to what I have to say in regards to my appreciation for you and saying thank you to you. Again, I want to say thank you, educators. And if you did choose to include this with your students, to thank your students for, of course, allowing me to share my space and my voice with you and within your space. I would say thank you for your patience with my verbal syntax grammar flaws, because I heard some and I chose not to make corrections. Remember, oh, you don't know this about me, I am a history teacher, not English. And so thus, because I am history, I usually tend to focus on content and not with syntax and grammar and verbal sentence structures like I normally do. Well, I do only with though essays and writing assignments. And so thus, seriously, thank you for your consideration and allowing me to share my voice with you and to help you delve into self reflection in an intentional way. And I hope that this was beneficial to you. And if not, I take that back. I hope that this was beneficial to you and that you will allow it to be used as a tool to help you become better at engaging and addressing racism. And even though I know that as individuals and as a nation, we're going to have to start becoming uncomfortable with become comfortable with being uncomfortable. At the same time, I recognize this is no easy feat. And it takes brave, bold people and individuals to really jump into this and to dive into something that is really, really very hurtful and harmful and insidious to communities in this nation, as well as, well, no, especially the educational institution in which we are all a part of, and that we take part of. And so thank you for allowing me into your academic setting, and hopefully I'll see you on the next vid.